All right, friends, we are going to be reading the School Story Part 3, chapters 13 through 17, starting with chapter 13, Open for Business. By Friday afternoon, everything was set. Zoe had put all the right numbers on the Sherry Clutch stationery, and she had 50 sheets printed up on good quality paper at Quick Copy Shop on Lexington Avenue. She'd also had 25 large self-stick address labels printed. Natalie made some last-minute changes to her novel and then printed 2 double-spaced copies of the manuscript, one for the publisher and one to keep for herself. The manuscript was 97 pages, and the title page said, "The Cheater" by Cassandra Day. Looking at it gave Natalie goosebumps. The first phone call to Hannah Nelson would be important, and Zoe was worried. Zoe and Natalie were in gym class on Friday afternoon. Zoe said, "So, when I call your mom today, she's got to say it's okay for me to send her the manuscript, and then when she gets it, she's got to want to read it." Zoe was quiet for a minute. Then she said, "My dad told me that when you want a person to agree with you, never ask a question they can answer by saying no. But I don't get how to do that, do you?" Natalie shook her head and shrugged. They were both quiet, sitting on a rolled-up tumbling mat, waiting their turn on the balance beam. Then Natalie had an idea. She said, "How about if you don't talk to her at all?" Zoe said, "What do you mean?" And Natalie told her. Zoe nodded and said, "Of course. That's it. Why didn't I think of that?" Natalie grinned and said, "Because sometimes brilliant writers have to help their stupid agents. That's why." By 3:10, the dreary school had gotten pretty quiet. At exactly 3:15, Natalie called her mom from a payphone on the wall outside the office. "Hannah Nelson." "Hi, Mom. It's me. I'm still at school, so I'm going to be a little late. How's your day going?" As soon as her mom answered, Natalie turned and gave the thumbs up to Miss Clayton, who was watching from down the hall. Miss Clayton walked briskly to the Linden room and stuck her head inside the door and said, "Okay, Zoe, Natalie's talking to her mom." Zoe sat down at Miss Clayton's desk and quickly dialed 7 numbers on her cell phone, then pushed the send button. 10 seconds later, she heard Natalie's mom's voice. "You've reached Hannah Nelson at Shipley Junior Books. I'm on another call or away from my desk right now. Please leave your name and number after the tone and I'll call you back." Zoe had practiced her agent voice for the past 2 days, driving Natalie nuts with it. Zoe always talked fast, anyway, but Zizi talked even faster. Zizi's voice was also deeper, but most of all, it was louder. Zoe had decided that Zizi should be loud. So after the beep on the voicemail, Zizi jumped right into her prepared message. Miss Clayton stood guard in the hallway outside the Linden room, and she could hear Zoe's performance right through the door. "Hannah, this is Zizi Reisman from the Sherry Clutch Agency. Listen, I've got this terrific manuscript by an author named Cassandra Day. You've got to read this. I've got a messenger bringing it to your office this afternoon. You really have to read this. Even though this is her first novel, I know a lot of editors will be interested, but Cassandra wanted Shipley to see it first because she likes a lot of the other books you've done there. I'm in and out a lot, but you can phone me at 212-555-8878. If I'm not in, the office will beat me. Let me know what you think as soon as you can. Because like I said, this is a hot one. Thanks a lot. Bye." Zoe's heart was racing when she hung up the phone. Miss Clayton walked back to the corner of the hallway and waved at Natalie. Natalie ended her talk with her mom by saying, "Well, I'll be leaving in a few minutes, so I'll be there in about a half an hour or so." Mom said, "No need to hurry. I'd like to get out of here early this afternoon, but I don't think it's going to happen. Letha's on a warpath, and my phone's been ringing all day long. So bring your homework, honey. See you soon." Natalie got off the elevator at Shipley Junior Books at 4:25. She walked to the desk and handed a thick brown envelope to the receptionist. Natalie smiled and said, "A messenger brought this. It's for my mom. Do you need to check it in, or can I take it right back to her?" He looked at the address label, and all it needs is a date stamp and my initials. The stamp made a mechanical ka-chunk sound as he pressed it into the front of the envelope. Then he scribbled his initials below the date. Now the package looked official. "Here you go." He handed the envelope back to Natalie, then pushed the security button to open the door for her. Natalie wound her way through the maze of her mom's office. Her mouth was dry. Even though she'd been here 100 times, she felt like a spy sneaking into a strange building. "Hi, Mom." As her mom swung her chair around and smiled, Natalie glanced at the phone console on the desk beside the computer screen. That message waiting light was dark. That meant her mom had already listened to Zizi's message. "Here," Natalie said. She handed the envelope to her mom. "This is for you." Hannah Nelson looked at the envelope. The large address label was printed in bright green ink, and she read the return address out loud. The Sherry Clutch Literary Agency. I just had a message from this agent, but I don't think I know her. Oh well. And she dropped the envelope into the papers beside her computer. Could you get me a juice or something, Natalie? I didn't even stop for lunch today. Natalie returned with 2 bottles of apple juice and some shortbread cookies. Her mom held up her bottle for a toast, and Natalie clinked. Her mom said, "Here's to our weekend." And at that moment, Latha walked in. She stepped across the space carefully, leaned over to look at Hannah's computer screen. Natalie caught a sharp scent of Latha's perfume and took a step backward. With a strained smile, Latha said, "I love the weekend too, but I don't think it's quite here yet. Have you double-checked all those revisions, Hannah? The production manager is calling me for that text every half hour, and we can't get out of here until it's released." Glancing around Hannah's workspace, she snatched up the new envelope and said, "What's this?" Hannah said, It's just a manuscript. Must be a new agency, Sherry something." Latha read the label, Sherry Clutch. "Oh, yes, I believe I've heard of her. She's supposed to be very bright. Listen, buzz me the second you're sure all those revisions check out, okay? And I want you to give this a look over on the weekend." Latha dropped the envelope on Hannah's lap and swept out of the office. Hannah shook her head and gave Natalie a wry smile. So much for the weekend, eh? "Listen, I've got to get back to work. Tim is probably gone by now, so you can hang out over there, okay?" Natalie said, "Sure, Mom." As she walked over to Tim's cubicle, Natalie tried not to smile. The editorial director of Shipley Junior Books had just pretended that she knew all about the Sherry Clutch Literary Agency, and then she ordered her best editor to read a novel written by a 10-year-old. Alone in Tim's office, Natalie grinned. For the first time ever, she was glad that her mom's boss was a fire-breathing, stuck-it-up know-it-all. Chapter 14, Judgment Day. After Latha told her mom to read the manuscript, Cassandra Day couldn't wait to tell her agent about this unexpected development. Natalie actually picked up the phone in Tim's office and dialed half of Zoe's number. Then she stopped and said to herself, "Do I really want Zoe calling me every 5 minutes all weekend long, asking me, 'Has she read it? Has she read it?'" Natalie hung up the phone. Then she picked it up and dialed the number again. Zoe deserves some kind of progress report, but she doesn't need to know everything. Bad enough that one of us has to worry the whole weekend. Zoe Reisman's room at the Reisman residence, Zoe Reisman speaking. Natalie kept her voice low because her mom's office was only about 10 feet away. "Zoe, it's me. The manuscript is here. It's in my mom's office." Zoe was excited. "Great. Is she going to read it? Did she listen to my message? Do you think she suspects anything?" "I know she got your message, and she doesn't suspect a thing, and I'm pretty sure she's going to read it, so we'll just have to wait and see what happens next." "You know," said Zoe slowly, "you could maybe help things along. You know, like pick up the envelope and say, 'I wonder if this one's any good,' something like that." Natalie smiled, but she talked in a serious voice. She wanted Zoe to calm down. "No, I think we better just let things move ahead on their own. If there's no action in a week or so, then maybe you can call her again." Zoe did not like that idea. "A week? Are you crazy? A week is forever. If I don't hear from her in 3 days, I'm going to turn the heat up. Way up." "Look, Azizi, relax. I've got to get off the phone now, but I'll let you know if anything happens, okay?" Zoe said, "Hey, maybe you could offer to read it for her, help her out around the office." "Zoe," Natalie said. No. Just be patient." "Yeah," said Zoe, "easy for you to say." "No, it isn't easy for me to say, Zoe. I want to know what she thinks about it just as much as you do. But we're just going to have to wait and let it move along one step at a time, okay?" There was a pause, and then Zoe said, "Okay, you're right, I guess. I'll call you if there's any news, I promise." "Okay," said Zoe, "bye." When they finally left the office at 7:15 on Friday night, Natalie could see the envelope from the Sherry Clutch Literary Agency sticking up from the outside pocket of her mom's briefcase. Natalie tried to think. She tried to decide what she was feeling. She couldn't figure out if she was happy or scared or numb or what, because what Zoe had said at the very beginning was true now. All of a sudden, her mom wasn't just her mom. She was her editor. Hannah Nelson would be the first person to read The Cheater in a professional way. Her own mom would be comparing Natalie's story to all the other manuscripts she had read during the past 5 years at Shipley Junior Books. Manuscripts written by successful, established professional authors. Part of Natalie wanted to snatch the envelope out of her mom's briefcase and toss it into a trash barrel. But it was too late for that. The day of judgment had arrived. But that day wasn't Friday. Friday night when they got home, Natalie and her mom went right out again and ate at a Chinese restaurant, and then caught a late movie at the local theater. One of those British movies where half the actors wear fancy clothes and the other half look like beggars. It was a lively story with plenty of action and a bit of romance, but Natalie couldn't stay focused on it. Her mind kept wandering back to the envelope, still in the briefcase, sitting on a chair in the entryway of their loft. And Saturday wasn't Judgment Day either. In the morning, they went grocery shopping, and then there was laundry, and then they both spent 2 hours cleaning the loft from one end to the other, and then it was dinner time. Natalie went to her room and read after dinner, hoping that if she left her mom alone, she'd remember the manuscript. At about 9 o'clock, Natalie opened her bedroom door and walked softly toward the living room area. Peeking behind the big leafy plants that framed the living room, she saw her mom. She was asleep on the couch, feet propped up on the coffee table, open magazine on her lap, bathed in flickering light from the muted TV. Lying in bed later, Natalie tossed and turned. She thought about the heap of envelopes stacked up in Ella's darkened office. For every envelope, there was a person somewhere, and Natalie knew how each of them felt. Those people were out there tonight, sleeping in hundreds of different beds in hundreds of different towns and dozens of different states. Every day, each person woke up and thought, maybe the editor will read my story today. Maybe the editor will call me today. Every day, each writer wondered if the mail would bring a letter, maybe good news from New York City, and Natalie felt guilty. Her envelope wasn't in a heap somewhere in a dark office. Her story was in the editor's briefcase. The editor's boss had assigned her story as homework. Natalie sat up in bed and looked at the clock. It was almost midnight. She groped for the phone on her bedstand and punched the glowing buttons. Zoe answered the third ring, groggy and grumpy. Hello? It's me, Zoe. I've got to tell you what happened. It took Natalie about 2 minutes to tell Zoe how her story found its way home with the editor for the weekend. Zoe was wide awake now. So she read it? Did she like it? What did she say? Did she finish it? Come on, tell me. Well, she hasn't read it yet. Not yet. She hasn't read it. So why did you call me in the middle of the night? Natalie hesitated. Because I feel bad. I feel like the girl in my book. I feel like I'm a cheater too. All those other stories at my mom's office, stories that she'll never even look at. And here's my story, and it's all the way up at the head of the line. It just doesn't feel fair. That's all. Not fair. Who said things are fair? It's never fair, Natalie. You're a great writer, and someone like me isn't. Is that fair? Is it? Well, no, I guess not, said Natalie. But you're great at things I stink at. Exactly, said Zoe. It all evens out. It seems unfair, but it's not. Your mom is a good editor at a good publishing company, and someone else's mom isn't. Is that fair? No, not really. Of course it's not fair. It's just the way it is. Didn't you have to look hard to write your book? Just as hard as those other writers did? Natalie nodded and she answered, yeah, I did. I worked hard. So do you know why your book is going to get looked at and some of other ones aren't? It's because you are who you are, and your mom is who she is, and you worked hard to write a great book. Zoe paused to let that sink in. Then she said, and there's another reason your book will get published, and most of those others won't. Natalie asked, why's that? In her best agent voice, Zoe said, because you have a great agent, and those other schnooks don't. Now listen, Cassandra, I'm giving you good advice, you hear me? You hang up now and get a good night's sleep, and just stop thinking so much. You artists are all alike, thinking. Not to worry, darling, Zizi is going to take good care of you. After hanging up, Natalie felt better, but it still took her another hour to get to sleep. And even if her lecture to Cassandra, Zizi lay awake doing some thinking of her own. Then, on Sunday, it happened. It was late in the afternoon, and after finishing her math and English, Natalie settled into her beanbag chair to read about ancient Egypt in her social studies book. The chair was so comfortable, and she had stayed up too late the night before. The next thing Natalie knew, her mom was shaking her awake. Natalie, you won't believe this. You know this manuscript Latha made me bring home? Well, I opened it up, and just so I could tell her that I looked at it, and I started reading it, and it's just, well, I couldn't stop reading. It's one of the best things I've read in a long time, and besides that, it's even a school story. Isn't that great? Natalie wanted to throw her arms around her mom's neck and burst into tears. She wanted to say, it's mine, Mom. I wrote that. I wrote it for you, and I wrote it for Dad, and I'm so happy that you like it. But she couldn't, so she didn't. Instead, Natalie gulped and smiled and said, that's great, Mom. So it's really good? Her mom nodded excitedly. It's got such a wonderful feeling all through it. I mean, it needs some work here and there, but this Cassandra Day, that's the author. It's her first novel, and for a first novel, it's terrific. I can't wait for you to read it. And Natalie nodded and said, I'd love to. But as she walked back to her workroom, Hannah wished she hadn't said anything to Natalie about the book, because the strongest section of the book was a part about this girl and her dad. Hannah worried about Natalie. Ever since she lost her dad, Natalie kept much more to herself. She seemed happy enough, and she didn't seem to need to talk about not having a dad, but maybe that was the problem. Hannah was glad Fred made the effort to be a part of the family, and she knew Natalie loved him, but having an uncle who loved you wasn't the same. Nothing could ever be the same. Hannah shook off her fear. After all, she thought, isn't that why I love my work? That's the whole idea of a good book, right? It's supposed to hit you right where you live. That's the point. Which was easy for her to see as an editor, but seeing it as a mom was a different story. Chapter 15, A New Island. Natalie and Zoe burst into Miss Clayton's room right before the first bell on Monday morning. Breathless, Zoe said, guess what? Natalie's mom got the manuscript, and her boss made her read it over the weekend, and her mom read it, and she loves it. Isn't that terrific? We did it. Natalie nodded. It's true, just like Zoe said. My mom raved about it last night, and she even mentioned it again this morning. I think she really wants to publish it. Miss Clayton smiled and reached out to take both girls' hands and swept up in the excitement. This is wonderful, and she doesn't have any idea that her own daughter wrote it. This is just too cool. Then Miss Clayton caught herself, and in her teacher voice she said, well, I think you both should be very proud. Neither one of you could have done it without the other. Or without you, said Natalie. Miss Clayton blushed and said, well, anyway, things are jumping now, aren't they? Keep me posted and let me know if I can help, okay? Robin started chirping, so Zoe and Natalie rushed out of the Linden room to go to their lockers and get ready for the morning meeting. Alone, Miss Clayton shook her head and smiled, half amused, half worried. She wished she could be 12 again. Back then, all she would have seen was the fun of a moment like this. But she was 26, and she was supposed to be the mature, grown-up teacher. And there were probably dangers ahead. There were still plenty of things that could go wrong if this little publishing adventure. If things started to turn sour, Miss Clayton the Bold could easily be renamed, and her new name might just be Miss Clayton the Idiot. In science class, Zoe was trying to pour exactly 30 cubic centimeters of distilled water into a graduated cylinder. Natalie was watching her, and all of a sudden, Zoe started spilling water all over the lab table. It splashed onto Natalie's notebook, and she said, hey, watch out! Behind her safety goggles, Zoe's eyes were as big as golf balls. She slammed the water bottle down on the table and grabbed the belt of her skirt. She pushed something into Natalie's hand, and it lay there jiggling. Zoe hissed, it's the beeper. It's ringing. That's the silent ring when it vibrates. Natalie turned the beeper and looked at the display. Look, she whispered, pointing at Zoe. Look, it's my mom's number. My editor is calling my agent. When lunchtime finally arrived, Zoe and Natalie ate in about 6 minutes and then hurried to the library. Mr. Levy was at lunch, and 2 8th graders, a boy and a girl, were in charge. They were flirting with each other at the front desk, and they didn't even look up as 2 6th grade girls hurried to the back of the room and went to the foreign language booth to shut the door. Natalie sat down at one of the stations and put on a set of headphones. She opened her Spanish book, but she didn't start a tape. Zoe sat down at the workstation opposite Natalie, away from the glass wall and completely hidden by the study carrel. She quickly dug her cell phone out of her backpack. She had already entered the voicemail number at the office's unlimited into her speed dialer, so in 10 seconds she was listening to the message. Natalie said, what'd she say? Shh, hissed Zoe, I'm still listening. The 15 seconds that followed seemed like years to Natalie. Then Zoe passed the phone over the top of the carrel. Here, push the star button quick, and the message will replay. Natalie glanced over her shoulder to be sure the 8th graders weren't looking. Then she pushed the star button and slipped the slim cell phone under the headphone cup covering over her right ear. It was her mom's voice. Zizi, this is Hannah Nelson at Shipley Junior Books. I read the manuscript you sent me this weekend, and I think we may be interested in it. I can't say for sure just yet, but I'd appreciate it if you'd let me respond before you start sending it to any other publishers. It's certainly not perfect, but I think the flaws are manageable, and it might just fit in with our program. So if you'd give me a call at 555-9091, we can talk about it. Again, that's 555-9091. Goodbye. Zoe took the phone back and turned it off. Her eyes sparkled, and she said, great, eh? She wants to talk. Natalie frowned and pulled off her headphones, but it sounds like she doesn't like it as much anymore. Do you think she's changing her mind about it? Zoe made a face. Of course not, silly. It's just business. She's not going to tell me that she loves it, because then I'd make her pay more money for it. She's just playing it cool, and she's afraid. I'm going to show it to other publishers, because then she'd have some competition for it. Natalie said, but we don't want some other publisher. Zoe smiled. I know that, and you know that, but she doesn't know that, and that's good. That way, we'll get a better deal. Natalie narrowed her eyes and said, Zoe, I don't want you messing this up, trying to make it some big deal. Let's just get the book published. Zoe waved her hand and said, relax. I've got it all under control. Put your headphones back on and listen to your agent go to work. Natalie pulled on the headphones, and Zoe sat down, turned on her phone, and dialed Hannah Nelson's number. She answered right away, and Natalie thought, poor woman, she's working through her lunchtime again. Natalie could hear only Zoe's half of the conversation. Hannah, this is ZZ Reisman from the Sherry Clutch Agency, and I'm returning your call. I'm so glad you like Cassandra's book. I think you're very smart to pick up on it right away. Yes, I can understand that. But still, if you're asking me to stop sending the book to other publishers, then you must have a very strong interest. Uh-huh. Yes, of course. I understand. So, Hannah, what's the next step here? Yes, that sounds good. Sure, but Wednesday would be better. I don't want to let this cool off. Fine. Yes, I understand. This is good. And I'll talk to you on Wednesday. And thank you. Goodbye now. Natalie yanked off the headphones and stood up to look over the top of the partition. Well, she said, does she want to publish it? Zoe nodded. I can tell she does, but she says she has to talk to the rest of the editorial committee. She's trying to sound like she's not excited about it, but when I asked her to call me on Wednesday instead of Thursday, she said yes right away. I think she really wants this book. 5 minutes after her first conversation with ZZ Reisman, Hannah Nelson knocked lightly on Latha Springfield's open door and stuck her head inside the office. Latha was on the phone, but she motioned for Hannah to come in and sit down. Latha's office was 4 times the size of Hannah's, complete with a couch and a little round conference table next to the windows that looked down into a plaza with trees and a fountain. Hannah sat at the table and tried to look like she wasn't listening. When Latha hung up the phone, she said, so, did you talk to the agent? Hannah said yes, and she said she'd like to hear back from us on Wednesday. So could you look over this and see if you agree with me? I really think it's a good one, and if we can come to terms quickly, this book could even make it into the summer catalog. Latha's eyebrows went up and she pursed her lips. So you really think this book is worth the rush? Hannah paused. Talking to Latha was dangerous. She enjoyed making her people take a strong position on everything. That way, if there were problems later on, it was never her fault. But Hannah felt sure about this book, so she said definitely, and I'll put in the extra hours to get it done right. Latha stood up and so did Hannah. Latha said, fine, I'll read it tonight, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. And I'm glad I had you read it over the weekend. Hannah handed her the envelope with the manuscript. Thanks, Latha. On the bus, Monday afternoon, Natalie didn't want to talk about the book. She was afraid she might jinx it, or say something stupid, or give away her secret. But just before they got to the terminal in Hoboken, her mom brought it up. You know that new book I told you about last night? She said. Natalie gulped and nodded. Yeah? Well, I talked to the agent today, and Latha's reading it tonight. I'm really excited about it. Natalie couldn't resist. She said, so what do you know about the author? Her mom shrugged. Nothing really, except she's a good writer, and she has a good ear for the way kids talk, and she knows how to keep a story moving forward. Her mom paused and looked out the window, and she said, I think finding a new writer is even more fun than working with someone who's already great. It's like finding a new island out in the middle of the ocean, and once you find it, from then on, that island goes on every new map. Then every time you look at the map, you see the island, and you say to yourself, that's the one I found. That's neat, Mom. It was quiet for a minute or so, and then Natalie said, you really like being an editor, don't you? Yes, I do. Hannah turned to smile at Natalie. There's only one thing I like better, and that's being your mom. Natalie smiled back, and the bus pulled into the station. Chapter 16. Poker, anyone? Right in the middle of Wednesday morning's meeting, Zoe's beeper started jiggling. She nudged Natalie, pulled her sweater up, and pointed at it. Natalie craned her neck and read the number and then frowned. In the hall, on the way to science, Natalie said, I don't get it. I can tell the call is from Shipley because all the numbers there start with 555, but it's not my mom's number. Maybe she called from a meeting in a different room, suggested Zoe, but anyway, we know her number, and I'll just call her at lunchtime like we did on Monday. When Zizi called Hannah Nelson from her soundproof office in the dreary school library, Natalie listened. Right away, she could tell there was something wrong. Hannah, this is Zizi from Sherry Clutch Agency. What's the news? Oh, I see. Well, I'm sorry about that. All right, goodbye. Natalie tore off her headphones and stood up. They're saying no? But she liked it so much, I don't get it. Zoe said, no, that's not it. The good news is that they like the book, and they definitely want it. But your mom said someone else is going to be the editor. She didn't sound very happy about it. It's someone named Latha Springfield. The color drained from Natalie's face, and she sat down with a thump. Zoe stood up and looked at her. Are you all right? Natalie said, Latha, she's my mom's boss. She's the one I'm always telling you about, and she can't be the editor. She's awful, and she doesn't even like kids. Whenever she sees me, it's like she wants to push me into a closet or something. I really want my mom to be the editor. Can't we do something? Zoe said, I'm not sure. After school, Miss Clayton listened while the girls told her the good news and then the bad news. Natalie said, I'm not kidding. I do not want that lady to be the editor. There must be something we can do. Miss Clayton looked out the window a few moments and then said, well, there is something you could try, but it might upset the whole deal. It all depends on how much they want your book. Natalie frowned. I don't care. I'll try anything. Miss Clayton turned to Zoe and said, you're going to have to be a pretty tough agent if this is going to work. Do you think you're ready to play some poker? Poker, said Zoe. I love poker. I beat my dad and my sisters at it all the time. Miss Clayton smiled wryly, looking from Zoe to Natalie, and said, why am I not surprised? Natalie frowned. But this time you're not playing for matchsticks, Zoe. No problem, Zoe said, and Natalie thought, yeah, that's what the captain of the Titanic said. Even after Miss Clayton had explained her idea, Natalie still felt like she was on a sinking ship. Hannah Nelson hurried to Latha's office at 3 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon. Latha was pacing behind her desk, her high heels clicking as she crossed and recrossed the hard plastic chair mat. Hannah said, what's up? Latha stopped, faced towards the windows, her back to Hannah. Turning around, she grabbed the high back of her gray leather desk chair, her fingernails digging into the padding. The nerve of that woman, talking to me that way, giving me an ultimatum, unbelievable. Tell me, did you make some sort of promise to her? Think very, very carefully before you answer me. Hannah was confused. Promise? To whom? To that woman, stormed Latha. Zizi, the agent from the loony bin, that's who. What did you tell her about that manuscript? Hannah gulped. Latha was never a picnic to work for, but when she was like this, things got broken. Things like vases and computers and careers. I didn't say anything out of the ordinary. I told her the manuscript had promise and that we wanted to think about it, and I asked her not to send it anywhere else until we got back to her today. And that's all? There was threat in Latha's voice, lurking below the shrill surface. Hannah met Latha's glare without blinking. Yes, she said evenly, I'm certain I said nothing more. Momentarily satisfied, Latha wheeled away, setting her chair spinning. Then what we're dealing with is crazy people, both her and her writer, because Zizi says that Cassandra Day has fixed on the idea that no one but you can edit the book. Hannah hid her feelings and asked, what did you tell her? Tell her, raged Latha. Tell her? I told her things don't work that way in the real world, and that she'd better go and shake her author by the shoulders and get her to wake up. I told her that I'm the editor-in-chief at Shipley Junior Books, and that I like the manuscript enough to take it on and edit it myself. And if her little Miss Day doesn't care for that, then she could take her manuscript and throw it off the Empire State Building. That's what I told her. Hannah wished she could leave, but she nodded slowly and said, oh, I see. Latha wasn't done. And do you know what she said to me? She said, well, Miss Springfield, I always try to do all I can for my writers. So perhaps we both had better think about this, as I'm suddenly going to change my mind. The nerve of that woman. There was a moment of quiet, and Hannah asked, so what are you going to do? Latha planted both feet and crossed her arms. Unless I get an apology, we will not publish that book. Then, pointing with one long index finger, Latha added, and if you have any contact with that agent, I want to hear about it. Is that clear? Hannah nodded, certainly. Latha sat in her chair and spun away to look out the window. The meeting was over. Hannah got out quickly, glad that she still had her job. Latha's door had been open, and everyone on the floor must have heard her shouting. She was glad Natalie wasn't around. Natalie had called right after school to say she'd be waiting for her in the lobby at 5. Hannah was suddenly desperate for a candy bar, so she walked to the elevator and headed toward the employee snack room on the 15th floor. 4 minutes and 1 Hershey bar later, Hannah sat alone at the small round table, feeling sorry for herself. She would have loved to edit that book, and she felt sorry for the author. It was a bad break. This could delay the publication of that book at least 6 months, maybe more, maybe forever. And it was such a good book. It would be a gain for some other publishing house and a loss for Shipley. But most of all, Hannah felt sorry for Zizi. Hannah was puzzled. Zizi had seemed so smart, so capable, but now it appeared very likely that Zizi was about to get run over by a steamroller. Hannah had thought about everybody in the New York publishing world knew about Latha Springfield. Latha was the wrong person to have for an enemy. And by that time, someone figured that out. It was usually too late. Natalie knew why her mom was so silent and tense on the cab ride to the Port Authority bus terminal Wednesday evening. Once they'd boarded the bus and was heading down the ramp to the Lincoln Tunnel, Hannah Nelson settled back in her seat and let out a deep sigh. Natalie said, "Another one of those long meetings today, Mom?" With a grim smile, her mom said, "No, actually, 2 short ones, both with Latha. Yep, one first thing in the morning and another one in the afternoon. They were both about that manuscript, The Cheater." "What? Didn't she like it?" Her mom let out a bitter little laugh. "That's not the problem. She liked it a lot. You'd have to be a moron not to. But first thing in the morning, she calls me in and says, 'This is a terrific book. This writer really knows kids, don't you think? You can just feel zits popping out on their faces. Thanks for spotting it. I'm going to handle it myself.'" Hannah turned to look out the window. Can she do that? Like, just take it away? Turning back to Natalie, her mom said, Latha can do pretty much whatever she wants to. What's so upsetting is that she does this all the time. I find a good property, and then she takes it over and steals all the glory. If you can call it that. It's not the glory I want. It's just that I'm trying to build a career here, and Latha's already got a great one. And this book, well, it has real promise, especially since it's a first novel. This is what an editor like me hopes for, a new writer with a strong book who has the promise of developing into something more. That's how an editor gets noticed in this business. I just happen to be cursed with a selfish boss, and there's not much I can do about it. What about the second meeting? Asked Natalie. At about 3, she yells for me to come in her office, and then she rants and raves about this agent. Her name is Zizi, because she called Latha and said that the author wants me to be the editor of her book. So Latha practically accuses me of going behind her back and making promises to the agent, which I would never do. So now Latha's got her high heels dug in, and she's saying that if it doesn't happen her way, then it doesn't happen. So the book is probably not going to get published, at least not in our company. Hannah paused and then said, "What I don't get is why would the author be so determined to have me be her editor anyway?" Natalie said, "It's because you're a great editor. That's why. And the author probably heard about you. And the agent could probably tell just from talking with you that you're so nice, too. Not like that witch Latha. Don't you just hate her?" "No, I don't hate her. I just don't understand her, that's all. It seems like it would be so easy for her to ease up a little. She's got all this talent, she looks great, she makes good money, and she really is an amazing editor. I guess she just has some other issues that make her feel like she has to keep grabbing more and more for herself. In a way, I feel sorry for her." She almost added, "And I feel even sorrier for myself." But she didn't. Hannah fell silent and turned to look out the window again. Natalie was quiet too. She wished she could comfort her mom. She'd say, "Don't worry, Mom, because if Miss Clayton and Zoe know how to play poker half as well as they think they do, then help is on the way." Chapter 17, High Stakes, Aces Wild. When a package arrived by messenger at 9:15 on Thursday morning, Kelly Collins double-checked the address label. Kelly had been Tim Morton's secretary for the past 6 years as he worked his way up through the ranks at Shipley Publishing Company. Whenever he had jumped a rung on the ladder, Kelly had jumped with him. And now Tom was the president and publisher of Shipley Junior Books, and Kelly was his executive assistant. Mr. Morton didn't usually get packages from agents, but this one was clearly addressed to him, so Kelly opened it. He wouldn't be in the office until 1 o'clock today, so she had plenty of time to get his correspondence and his afternoon appointments organized. She started to read the cover letter from the agent, and when she got to the name Latha Springfield, she stiffened. Her eyes narrowed and her mouth formed an involuntary frown. Kelly had been watching Latha Springfield carefully over the past 2 years. Every time Latha had the other editors-in-chief came to a meeting on the 16th floor, Kelly had the feeling that Latha was measuring the windows in Tom Morton's office for her curtains. Her curtains. Kelly finished reading the letter, and then she looked at the manuscript. Good title, she thought. Kelly flipped to the title page over and began reading. After 3 pages, she was hooked. She read the story off and on all morning, and then finished it over the noon hour. And when she got back from lunch, Kelly put the letter and the manuscript at the top of the stack in Mr. Morton's inbox. At 1:15 on Thursday afternoon, Tom Morton called to Kelly through his open door. Kelly, would you like to take this down to the 14th and give it to Latha? She really ought to handle this herself. When Kelly walked in, he was holding out the manuscript and the letter from the agent. Kelly took the manuscript from him, and Tom looked down at the next item on his desk. But Kelly didn't leave, and when he noticed, Tom looked up again and said, "Something else?" Kelly shifted her weight from one foot to the other and then plunged in. Holding up the letter, she said, "Mr. Morton, I know this situation is sort of a can of worms, but did you look at the story? It's a great book. I read the whole thing over my lunch hour. I think it might be worth taking a look at, if you don't mind my saying so." Tom Morton never minded Kelly saying what was on her mind. She had kept him from making at least a dozen mistakes over the years, several mistakes that could have delayed his promotions, and 1 or 2 that could have cost him his job. She had the instincts of a mother lion, and Tom was glad to have her looking out for him. With a smile, he pushed the papers on his desk to one side, took the manuscript back from her, and began reading. Kelly turned and left his office, pulling the door shut behind her. 10 minutes later, Tom Morton buzzed Kelly on the speakerphone. "Yes, Mr. Morton?" "Kelly, hold my calls for an hour or so, would you? I'd like to finish reading this manuscript." Kelly Collins smiled at her phone and said, "Will do." At precisely 3:46 on Thursday afternoon, Latha Springfield and Hannah Nelson each received an email message, and the little mail delivery chime bonged on both of their computers. Latha ignored the chime because she was on the phone, but Hannah clicked on her email icon and read the message right away. The Cheater Manuscript. Latha, it's odd for an agent to send anything directly to me these days, so I took note when someone named ZZ Reisman messengered me a manuscript this morning. It's called The Cheater, and from the cover letter, I gather you've seen it too. I started reading it, couldn't stop. Made me remember all those years I spent as an editor. I hate to step in, but it's clear that unless we put Hannah on this project, we'll lose the book. And frankly, we can't afford to. I smell a hit here. And if we have to let a headstrong author have her own way in order to keep the book, then I say we let her. I've called Susan Yao in marketing and asked her to save a half page for this in the summer catalog. I know a June pub date is pushing it, but this would build nicely and be strong right into the fall. Have Hannah handle the deal and the editing. I'd like her to keep me in the loop on this. Susan will call her in a day or so for the catalog information. Thanks, Tom. As Hannah read the email, her throat tightened up. Her heart raced and she felt as if she couldn't breathe. Hannah knew this feeling. It was fear. Looking at the heading of the email again, she saw that her copy was a BCC, a blind copy. That meant Tom Morton had sent Hannah a copy of his message to Latha, but Latha didn't know about the copy. Hannah took several deep breaths to try to clear her head. She thought, doesn't Tom know what an impossible situation this puts me in? Doesn't he know that it's already hard enough to work for Latha? Nervously, Hannah jumped up on her chair. Standing on her tiptoes in her doorway, she peeked over the top of the cubicle dividers to look across at Latha's office. Latha was there talking on the phone, smiling and nodding. Hannah thought she must not have read it yet. Hannah sat down and looked at the email still open on her computer screen. She tried to think calmly, but she couldn't. This message was like a time bomb in Latha's computer, ticking away. And any minute now, Latha would click it open and boom. Hannah shook her head. She had to admire this ZZ Reisman. Sending the manuscript directly to Tom Morton was a gutsy thing to do. She thought, this woman is incredibly brave, or else she's incredibly stupid. Hi. Hannah jumped out of her shoes. She wheeled around. "Oh, it's you, Natalie. Oof, you surprised me." Instantly, Hannah turned around and grabbed her purse from the bottom drawer of her desk. She pulled out $2 and said, "I think you better go up to the lunchroom and study this afternoon, honey. Here's some snack money." Natalie looked at her mom. She said, "Are you okay, Mom? You look kind of funny." Hannah laughed nervously. "Just a lot going on today, that's all. Now run along and stay put. I'll come up and get you on my way out, okay?" "Sure, Mom. See you later." Latha Springfield stomped off the elevator onto the 16th floor. It was 6 minutes after 4 o'clock. 5 minutes earlier, Latha had read her email from Tom Morton. Grim, unsmiling, Latha didn't slow down. She glared at the receptionist, who scrambled to push the security button just as Latha reached the door to the executive offices. Striding on, Latha approached Tom Morton's office. She had a piece of paper in her hand. As she went marching right past Kelly Collins into Tom Morton's office, she waved it and said, "Mr. Morton is expecting me." The office door slammed shut behind her. Kelly kept tapping away at her keyboard. A nearly invisible smile tickled the corners of her mouth. She wished she could be a fly on the wall in her boss's office. At 4:45, Hannah was working on the letter to one of her authors. She heard a rustle of papers behind her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Hannah tensed, and then she turned her chair to face the doorway. It was Latha. "Here." Latha's voice sounded like a shovel, plunging into a pile of gravel. She handed Hannah the manuscript. Hannah didn't have to look to know what it was, but she did. Then did her best to look surprised. Latha said, "I've decided you should handle this one. After all, we don't want our sensitive little Miss Author to get her tummy all tied up in knots, now do we? So I want you to take it from here." Hannah tried to keep the right mixture of surprise, confusion, and obedient acceptance in her voice and gestures. She said, well, I'll be glad to. Are you sure you want me to?" Coldly, evenly, Latha said, "Very sure." And with that, she turned and walked briskly back towards her office. Hannah took 3 or 4 deep breaths. She thought, if I ever get fired from here, I'll go train tigers for Ringling Brothers. It'll feel like a vacation. When her mom came to get her in the snack room, Natalie thought her mom's face looked strange. She seemed to be in a big hurry, too. She was silent in the elevator, and once on the ground floor, she took Natalie's hand and practically dragged her across the lobby, and then squeezed in the same compartment of the revolving door with her. Once they were out of the building and down the block near where they caught their cab, her mom started to laugh and swing Natalie's arm back and forth, almost giddy. Natalie said, "What's all this about?" Hannah stopped to catch her breath and at the same time held up her hand to flag a vacant cab. Then she giggled and said, "You'll never believe what happened at work today." But her mom was wrong. Natalie believed every word of it. That's the end for today.